So we're doing some little bit of breaking news here on the Search with Candour podcast. I am joined by the English language marketing manager over at Systrix. Welcome back, Steve.
Hello, Jack. How are you? Thank you
I'm
for inviting me.
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, we were literally chatting about this last night, late last night. Mark, and you and I were like, okay, right, let's get things together. Stuff seems to be happening, and you haven't been on the show in nearly, I think it's 2.5 years. You were here in the studio with us
I
back
feel like
in.
I've been there because I've been following you very closely.
I had a different surname back then. That's how long ago I was a single free man back then.
Yeah, well done on the continued success of Search with Candour. It's seems to be getting it out there, and it's definitely a recommendation from me. So well done.
Thank you, mate. Thank you, mate. I appreciate what you guys are doing over at Systrix. And speaking of which, we've got some very interesting insights and data. Not a full podcast, a quick little update, essentially talking about what is going on with the site reputation abuse stuff that is we're seeing a lot of people talking about on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and all that kind of stuff, and how that kind of connects to the November core update that is rolling out as we speak. So to give the listeners and viewers a little bit of context, and we've discussed this many times on the podcast before, especially when Mark and I were here in the studio talking about all the news that was happening. But the site reputation abuse was originally mentioned as a reaction to the big thing that was happening with parasite SEO, as we were calling it back in the day. That was in March of this year. Then the discussion about how that would be enforced through manual actions, whether it's going to be algorithmic, that happened later on through the year. I know there's a quote from Chris Nelson talking about that and going through an interview with Search Engine Land. And then we now come through, 8-9 months later through to November. The November core update starts rolling out on the 11th of November 2024. I know a lot of people have been covering that. I know you guys flagged that with the spikes in data that you guys see there. You're always hot on it and aware of what's going on with all the data at Systrix, which is very much appreciated. And now we're seeing how this kind of connects into and the updates of documentation from Google's side for the site reputation abuse as well. So I guess kind of open the floor to you, Steve, of what have you been seeing over the last couple of days? There seems to be a lot of chatter going on, but you've actually got the data to back it up, right?
There's always a lot of chatter, isn't there? Because there's always a lot of people affected, but you never quite know the scale of how that's happening. So let's give you a little bit of an overview. We're in day 11 or 12, depending, I think, where you live today. And in terms of overall effect of the core update as it rolls out, it's been very, very quiet. So what that means is, in absolute terms, the SERPs are not changing as much as they have in previous updates. So if you look at our core update radar, you'll still see the previous update on it, and it's much higher peak and much more. It's a jagged curve. But the one we've seen in the last. Yeah, the volatility. Sorry, I was looking for the word. The growth of change has been steady. It hasn't peaked. So overall, things are fairly quiet, but that doesn't mean things are not happening. We can go down to the smaller websites, and Systrix, we use the visibility index, and often our sort of not a cutoff point, but VI1 is the sort of cutoff point where we would say, okay, this is very serious business. Under VI1, this is developing business. So if you go down VI1, what you also get is a lot of noise. So all the spam stuff that's going on, all the hacks that are going on. There was a great one this morning for a food van in the US has been hacked and injected with millions of recipe pages. This has an impact on search, but this is down in the noise level, so it's very difficult to find the ones that are really reacting to the core updates. So there are a few things happening at the on the high end of things, but in general it's pretty quiet. So let's talk about a few websites that we know about. Let's start with Reddit, which is stable. I don't know.
Surprise.
Who would have bet on that? Because I probably wouldn't have bet money on it being stable, because it's at such a high peak and it's grown so quickly that you wonder whether it's stable at that level. But it's still stable, and it's actually risen a couple of VI points today. Let's go to Forbes, which has been the center of a lot of attention amongst the sort of discussion about parasite content. When we talk about Forbes, we must remember it's a massive set of websites and probably different business and business units. They all sit under Forbes.com, but there are both host names and directories, which are completely different businesses to Forbes. I think most of us know that by now, that some of the stuff that might fall under site reputation abuse, falls under advisor. There are a few other areas as well. Interestingly, Forbes had been going up over the last 6 or 7 days during the core update in the last 48 hours. And this follows some activity we've seen from people like Lily Ray, Glenn Gabe, Barry Schwartz that have identified sites that are getting notifications that they've abused something. In the last 48 hours, we're seeing some changes. Interesting that Forbes are starting to go down, but across the directory levels, it's not just the affiliate supported parts of the website. There are pages for Elon Musk's, just information pages, which have no advertising on them at all. They are also starting to go down, but not at the rate where I would say this is going to take them out of the SERPs, but this is looks like an additional, let's say, an additional algorithmic or manually implemented model that is going across the SERPs in the last 48 hours. So there's a number of news websites that have been going up over the last week and then have just started to turn down in the last 48 hours. CNN is one of them. But there are winners too. So Very Well Health has taken a massive rise in the last 11 days. If you look at it on a bigger scale over a year, they're actually net down on this year. So, it's a nice week for them, but still net down on 2024. Hostinger.com is a smaller website. It's ad light. There's no major affiliate content that I could see on it. Informational website that's looks to be over 5 years old, has made some very big gains this week as well. Simplicable, a website I hadn't heard of before, but it's an informative website. They've made gains in November. Again, a net loss in 2024. And if you look at archive.org, you can see that they've built out some of their very evergreen, very simple color-based informative pages. What things are blue, what other words describe blue. I mean, it's all things that people search for, perhaps, and it seems that it might be competing with many other websites out there that do a similar sort of involved forms of content. But they've built out some of their websites after they got hit last time, and now they're coming back again. Net losses over the year. Generally across news media, okay. It looks pretty. It looks pretty okay. Sorry, news media in the UK, it looks okay. Yep. Although the Guardian in both the US and the UK has dropped in the last 48 hours. But again, not at the rate where I would say it's been taken out. So not a manual. We have to distinguish between manually being taken out of the SERPs, like not casino.com. What was the IRC.org, the Inland Revenue copy site that got taken out 5 years ago? That got manually removed. What's happening here is potential targeted, maybe manually typed in at Google. Some person sitting in the corner just got told, could you put these domain names into the spreadsheet, please? Boom, kicked off an API, and then all these websites getting hit. So maybe it's manually instigated, but I think based on some learning or some algorithm, maybe running over the top of what's happening in the core update. So it's still happening, and still a few days, in theory, 2 weeks, up to 2 weeks, they said. And we'll continue to update on our blog.
Yeah, I think the manual side of it, I think, is interesting because we've seen a lot of discussion of manual actions, and Google has confirmed that's how the site reputation abuse was being kind of enforced upon sites and things like that. This has not been rolled out algorithmically yet. I know Glenn highlighted a change in the documentation. I'll briefly read here from the Google documentation and the kind of update here of our efforts to understand differences in sections of sites can lead to traffic changes if subsections no longer benefit from site-wide signals. We've talked about site-wide signals a million times before. This doesn't mean that these subsections have somehow been demoted or in violation of our spam policies. It simply means we're measuring them independently, even if they are located within a site. So there's an element there of, as you were saying, Steve, various different directories and subdomains. Take Forbes as being the prime example here of that site-wide signal, and we think of Forbes as the domain, but actually you're thinking about it directory by directory, subdomain by subdomain, right?
Yeah, we mustn't forget that with Forbes. It's a bit like Reddit, really. Reddit, everyone says Reddit competes with Core. It doesn't. It actually competes with tens of thousands of smaller websites at the subreddit level. Well, so does Forbes. It competes in different areas. based on the business unit that's working on the website. Tesco.com is a good UK example where, /direct was a completely separate business that closed down. And that's what we saw when they lost their visibility sort of 7 years ago. So yeah, we mustn't forget that. But looking across the directories, I think there's a mix of directories. Not all of them seem to be affiliate. Some of them are still growing, some of the directories, and haven't been affected over the last 48 hours. So it's still a fair bit to learn as well.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting update from Lily Ray talking about, like you said, it doesn't necessarily always have to be affiliate stuff. And I think a lot of people kind of focus on that, the third-party nature of that content, right? And I know Google has talked about the difference between the main site content and this content, and how different are they kind of indicates you're doing something a bit dodgy and might be getting caught up in this update. But Lily has seemingly got some examples and has discussed having where it's created by the people who run that website. The same author who creates the main content is also doing the stuff that's getting penalized, and even potentially page by page, URL by URL, let alone by directory by subfolder. So I think it's an interesting thing where I think a lot of us had kind of, and this is, I say us in the very, very broad sense of big websites who are doing this kind of thing, not us at all, but the kind of sites that kind of seemingly got comfortable and we're like, well, we're not doing anything dodgy, we're not doing, we haven't got caught up in parasite SEO stuff, the site reputation abuse stuff that now, as we call it now. But it seems like a lot of those sites who didn't seemingly do anything wrong per se are also getting caught up in this as well. And I know a couple of people going back and forth of like, that's just how businesses are these days. So many businesses are ad supported, and speaking in the podcast industry, like everyone is basically ad supported or subscription models and all that kind of stuff. I think that's probably the future of publishing as we know it, and that's a whole other discussion we don't have time for.
Oh, it's a massive discussion, isn't it? And a really interesting one as well.
And we briefly talked about it when we met in Barcelona last week, right?
As those business models fall away, who's going to create content in the future? I hope there's some business models left for great experts out there, because we don't want them all on Reddit, right?
Exactly. The world is just taken over by Reddit.
I was just looking at, you remember the example housefresh.com?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Earlier this year, well, probably in the sort of, I think, April time frame, was it? The one that lost, the one that was very vocal about the losses that it's made.
But the two examples I always think of are HouseFresh and Retro Dodo, the retro gaming site, because I know Brandon who runs Retro Dodo. So,
right. So they're back above levels that they had in 2023. Mid 2023, they had a massive peak, which doesn't seem to have been sustainable. They dropped back down again, but they're back now up above. If I talk about net 2-year figures, they're back above what they were 2 years ago. But what's happened this week for them is not significant. They haven't been hit. So taking some of the old examples, we're talking probably about a different type of. A more refined or a different type of algorithm, a different type of change that's being targeted here, and we have to wait a few more days before we can really get the final figures out.
Yeah, we'll have to do another update and have a look. Like I said, keep an eye on the Systrix blog. Keep an idea of what people like Glenn, people like Barry, people like Lily. I'll put links to follow those guys on LinkedIn and all that stuff in the show notes. I'll put links to follow you as well, Steve, and all the excellent work you guys are doing over at Systrix. And thought we'd just quickly jump on, give you guys a quick update. Is there anything else you want to promote? Anything else you need to discuss, Steve, before we sign off?
No, I think everyone should sign up and spread the word for Search with Candour, basically.
Hey, thank you, mate. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, Jack. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Steve. Speak to you soon.